Jack, did you have a good bank holiday?
It was good, thank you. How about you?
I had a bit of a mare. We took our boy to the beach, went to Hunstanton, which was very nice on the bank holiday. I'm a fair-skinned guy, of the red hair variety. So me and the sun don't exactly get on.
Mm-hmm.
So below the knee, I would say, kneecaps as well, little bit sunburnt, quite a lot sunburnt on the kneecaps. There's kind of like 2 red tomatoes stuck on my knees, basically.
Oh, no.
A volcano in Iceland is putting out less heat than what's coming out my knees. And then to make matters worse, being clever, I thought I'll put AdBlue in my car. Didn't attach the top properly, put the AdBlue in, spilt out, went all over my legs. Didn't really think of that for a second until about 5 minutes later when I thought, oh, that sunburn's starting to itch a little bit. And then I looked down and realised, oh no, that's not sunburn. That's sunburn and a bit of a chemical burn going on there.
I'd recommend Sudocrem over AdBlue, to be honest, for future reference. You know those drumstick sweets you can get? I'm guessing your legs look a bit like that. Hello, I'm Jack Watts, and welcome to Agonomics.
With Udall and Watts.
It's actually with David and Jack.
That's a sliding doors moment, if there ever was one, coining that name.
He's David Udall, and like me, he's an economist at AHDB.
Although you've got to admit, Udall and Watts has a bit more grit to it. It's a bit like Regan and Carter in the Sweeney.
This week, we're looking at harvest progress.
David and Jack just feels more, I don't know, Tom and Jerry, Pinky in the Brain.
We'll be joined by our colleague, Helen Plant, who is the senior analyst for cereals and oilseeds around here.
Although which one of us will be the angry, calamitous one? And who's the annoying, squeaky one?
Please follow or subscribe to this podcast to make sure you don't miss an episode.
New shows drop every Wednesday at midday, and please get in touch.
Comment on any of AHDB's social channels.
Or email us agonomics@ahdb.org.uk. So we've had an email from a new listener in Scotland, Michelle Colhoun from the Agriculture and Rural Economy Directorate, who told us listening to our podcast is just what she has been waiting for without knowing it. Same here. We're the Ellis and John of meat, and she's hooked. I have no idea who Ellis and John are, so our producer Martin has added some notes for me that Ellis James and John Robbins are comedians who present a podcast. New to me. He's also, rather cheekily, added notes explaining who the Sweeney was, just in case I needed to know, and I did know it was a 1970s police television drama, thank you very much. And also that Tom and Jerry is a long-running cartoon series centred on a rivalry between a cat and a mouse. I did know that as well. I don't know where this assumption comes from that I don't know these things. Just because I don't listen to many podcasts, people think that I'm just kind of out of touch with anything in the world.
We'll get you hooked by the end of the year. I'm sure we will.
What, on Tom and Jerry?
Maybe Peppa Pig. Let's start there.
Yeah, start there. Yeah.
And we've both got a mystery word, phrase, or thing that has no right to be in a podcast about agriculture or economics to slip in somewhere. Hopefully there's no need to wheel out AHDB chair Nicholas Sapphire to adjudicate this week.
So welcome to Helen Plant to the podcast, and we're going to be talking about harvest progress. And I'm glad of this, of a bit of factual evidence about harvest, because I'm quite ashamed to admit I haven't actually seen a physically moving combine through harvest this year. I've seen static combines, but I haven't seen the moving combine, which was taking me to the point of a little bit of kind of conspiracy theory of maybe thinking that this harvest wasn't really real and it was like just media telling me that stuff was being harvested. So getting some facts and information on what is actually happening would be really useful, I think, especially getting the end of August now as we record this. So Helen, I guess from a headline perspective, what's the latest on harvest? What's the progress to date and what's everything looking like?
Our data runs up to the 14th of August at the moment, and then we're getting a next report coming in later this week. So looking back, sort of by the middle of August, we'd got through all of our winter barley, pretty much all of the oilseed rape as well. So I'm assuming those will all be nicely wrapped up now as the weather's sort of stayed fairly kind to us over the last couple of weeks. And then as well, by that mid-August point, we had 37% of the wheat harvested, 22% of the oats, and just getting into the spring barley with about 7% cut. So that kind of brings us to date in progress. And I think the weather's stayed fairly kind over the last couple of weeks, which I think will have helped progress carry on over those few. And we'll be making some real good progress by now. In terms of sort of what we've been finding, though, as the combines have been going through from a yield perspective, it comes as no surprise that after the year we've had, the winter crop yields have really been struggling. Perhaps not as bad as some were fearing, but still a long way below average. Just to give you a flavour, so based on those percentages done, for wheat, we were looking about 7% below average, winter barley, 11%, and oilseed rape around 9%. So really quite challenging yield perspectives on those. And then sort of coming through, looking at the spring crops, we didn't say it was quite early in terms of progress, but the first results coming off were more encouraging. And that's certainly something we picked up anecdotally as well, talking to people since then, is that for spring crops, things are definitely better than potentially expected.
And within those figures, Helen, as well, from what I've been hearing, there's quite a big range, isn't there? Considering, especially from a winter crop perspective, of when the crop went in the ground and then the relative conditions that it had since then, but also because of like regionality and variety as well. There's quite a big range that we're seeing in those. So I think that's why it's it was a difficult year to pin where the area was because of the conditions that we saw, and the outcome of that means it's a difficult year to kind of pin where there's that sort of total view of yield across the country is, and across the country from a quality perspective, just because there is so much variation out there.
Absolutely. It's such a horrible year. I think it's one that many would soon forget. I think as soon as they can get through and done, they will be glad to see the back of. And yeah, you're right on the quality. We are hearing some quite varied reports as well. But again, perhaps some not as bad as expected on the winter crops, and encouraging on the spring is sort of the message hearing so far. The main concern, though, being some of the lower protein levels, particularly for wheat and on malting barley as well.
So I think we've all seen it's kind of been a bit of a sort of a growing season of the winter crops versus the spring crops. Clearly, the winter crops have been, a really challenging period through the winter and into the early spring, which then started to impact expectations for spring crops as well, because plantings were massively delayed, a lot of standing water in the way, and of course we were going to have to grow more spring crops in place of where a lot of winter crops should have gone. And I think certainly from a potential point of view, spring crops have been done really well. Obviously, the big caveat that we're still waiting to sort of see what those outcomes look like for harvest. A lot of crops went in very late April, even some into May, which is a good 6 to 8 weeks behind where they would normally go in. But the irony being is that the weather nursed those crops through with the right rainfall at the right time to keep those crops going. The sort of the worst case scenario was that we were going to have a 2020 kind of weather, a very hot, dry spring. If we cast off memories back to that first lockdown, and when just the sun came out and everything baked. But actually, even though those crops went in late, the weather's nursed them through. And I think some of the spring crops will be some of the crops, some of the best crops that we see coming through this harvest, just because they've had that supportive weather, and particularly from a spring barley point of view, and of course the spring oats as well.
So I suppose let's talk about a bit of a positive in all this, Helen, that we have seen some, I suppose, more positive harvest results from the oat crop, and notably the spring oat crop, because that's an area where actually it was planted at probably some of the best times. It had some of the better growing conditions, and it seems to be one of the crops that's done rather well this year.
Yeah, it does. And given how late it went in, though, like it went in good conditions, but it was late, which sort of then cast a question mark over those conditions. So for those reports coming out so far are actually really encouraging. And it does seem to be, one of the better crops this year, which would be a big positive and a relief for a lot of folk.
And then on the opposite side of that coin, we've then got oilseed rape, which is definitely a crop that's struggled this year again.
Yeah, it's a very challenging crop for a lot of folk, and it's been from the establishment going in all right, but then being hit so badly by all that weather in the autumn. And yes, it picked up through the growing season, but it's still a long way below where it was, and we're seeing that as it comes through to harvest. I suppose the small glimmer is in terms of oil content. We're not hearing major concerns on that front. That seems to be looking okay, so taking a small positive, but as a bigger picture, it's definitely struggled.
I've already seen, we've heard of drills out early August, as soon as crops were coming off the ground, oilseed rape was being put in. So whilst it is still a struggle, there's obviously people that have found ways to be able to get it in. And it seems that planting early to get some good establishments, and we have had some nice rain as well, which will help it develop in early August. That may mean that some of those good crops that went in will be able to get away from some of that early damage from flea beetle if they are in good time. So fingers crossed for a more positive outcome for this coming crop of oilseed rape. Great, thank you for that, Helen. You've convinced me that harvest has happened, even though I've not actually seen a combine roll. When we come back after a short break to cover off what's the latest in the markets, we're going to be looking at what it all means, what it could mean for prices, what it means for supply, demand, and where the world may go in the future.
If you're in the market for another podcast to subscribe to, then look no further than our Manager's Special, AHDB's Food and Farming podcast. Recent episodes include a consumer insight offering on red meat labels and supermarket aisles, as well as a dairy special about our work with retailers to promote milk. If you're after herbs, or rather herbal lays, our shelves are stacked with sage advice on how to introduce lucerne and clover into your fields. In fact, we cater for all tastes, so you'll find sections dedicated to all sectors: pork, cereals and oilseeds, dairy, and beef and lamb. And don't forget our middle aisle, where you can often pick up a bargain episode you didn't know you needed to listen to. Search Food and Farming wherever you get your podcasts. AHDB thanks you for your custom.
Hi, I'm Olivia Bonser, Senior Analyst at AHDB, with a look at grain and oilseed markets for the week commencing the 6th of January. Despite some support in wheat markets over the Christmas period, prices have been under pressure in the new year from a strengthening US dollar, technical selling and sluggish global demand. However, Russian wheat crop conditions remain in focus, with warmer than usual temperatures and excess moisture in key growing regions. Persistent hot and dry weather in Argentina is also raising concern over the country's maize crop, which is now in its critical development stage. For rapeseed, new crop prices are supported, with doubts over prospects for global rapeseed production in 2025, though forecasts of heavy soybean supplies from South America limit any major price increases. Over the next few weeks, weather in major exporting countries such as South America and Russia will be key in driving prices. The USDA will also release updated global supply and demand estimates at the end of this week. To stay up to date with the latest data and analysis across arable, red meat, and dairy markets, head to hdb.org.uk and click on Markets and Prices.
Welcome back to Agronomics with David and Jack, or Udall and Watts. I think we should have a vote on that. We're here with Helen Plant, Senior Analyst for Cereals and Oilseeds, talking about harvest results and what it all means. And in the first half, we spoke sort of on the headlines of the harvest, and now we're going to go into a bit more depth. And one thing that we didn't mention earlier on was about the quality wheat aspect, and I suppose we're going to talk about that a bit more. And a key thing as well, we were talking about the good of wheat. Let's also talk about the bad of wheat for a second, that because of all that rainfall that we saw, it does seem as if there's a greater prevalence of ergot around this year. We also had quite a lot of ergot last year as well. And it reminded me that we produced a piece of work recently, which is available on our website, which was looking at the relative costs of cleaning ergot out of milling wheat compared to the milling premiums. And that's shown that in a commercial grain store, indicative costs around £18 a tonne. For those that are members of sort of specific grain stores, they can be cheapened. And for a mobile colour sorter, that's around £13 a tonne, although they're very hard to come by, mobile colour sorters, at this time of year because of the demand and obviously the seed cleaning as well. But with premiums being very high, even the cost of all of that means that milling wheat premiums, after all of the cleaning out of ergot, are still pretty strong, anywhere between what our analysis was finding sort of high £20 per tonne to low £40 per tonne after everything's been cleaned out. But the key consideration with ergot is to remember all the alkaloids within there and make sure that all the mycotoxin tests have been done and is clean as well. So ensuring grain safety is important with ergot, but the market is definitely giving an incentive to find that milling wheat this year. And I suppose, Helen, that's, again, we spoke about the sort of mention the lower quality of sort of lower protein earlier, but again, it's the variability both in this harvest, but also what we're seeing in our near neighbours as well.
Yeah, it's been a challenging year on that front, the variability-wise. Particularly when you look just across the channel, France has really struggled on a specific weight and protein front, not quite as badly, but the specific weights particularly are looking in the initial results not great in France, and hearing sort of similar messages coming out of Germany as well. From our point of view, from a milling wheat availability, that is important because we import quite a lot of bread wheat from Germany as well.
It's a fascinating year for milling wheat, and because of all those issues that have been discussed. I think the key call to action there is don't automatically resign your wheat crop to the feed pile until you've been through it with a fine-tooth comb to find if there is any quality, because there is value to that quality. And so if there ever was a year for intensive sampling and testing to find the quality, to segregate, to speak to buyers about what their needs are and what you've got, I think that's going to pay dividends if there's quality somewhere in the crop.
I suppose on that front, we are still finding out the levels and all of that. We've just started collecting data from the trade now for our cereal quality survey, and hoping to publish the results in the middle of September. We're just finalising dates at the moment, but it is definitely looking that way of a very variable picture. So trying to produce an average is going to be important this time with the data coming in.
Yeah, so let's talk about the barley crop in a bit more detail then. That we've got two sides to the barley market, and malting barley, that we're seeing lower nitrogen levels in winters, which isn't necessarily a good thing because you need a higher nitrogen for that winter malting crop that's going into that sort of domestic lager production, and is also tricky from an export perspective, isn't it, Helen?
Yeah, particularly on the springs though, that nitrogen level that we need to be able to export into that European market. So that said, there are questions about what nitrogen level are going to be seen across Europe, but some of the key ones, harvests are still ongoing, so not sure about where the total European level will come out. Like here, with more crops going in the ground, there's bigger areas, so potentially more to choose from as well. So it's a little bit of wait and see on that kind of front to see where we go. But yeah, certainly from a UK perspective, needing a higher nitrogen, sort of around the 185s to export, which could be a challenge for us this time.
It's always important to remember the strength of the distilling market as well, which will be a really, really useful market, particularly if we've got a dual purpose variety that can go into either the brewing or the distilling market, is going to be really important. It's kind of a classic kind of distressed oversupply of malting barley, kind of a risk going on here. We knew there was going to be more land diverted into spring barley because of the wet autumn, and then the generally supportive growing conditions, which has diluted nitrogen and protein out over the greater yield. And so, yeah, challenges we've got on some of those meeting needs of those slightly higher nitrogen markets, but the distilling market, we'll see, I think at the moment, we'll be expecting to see quite a lucrative supply. I think there's a big caveat on that at the moment, in that we're still to see, and as we speak, there's still quite a lot of spring barley sat out in the field, not just here, but Scandinavia as well. And the key thing, everyone always tells me about malting barley, it's a living commodity. You need the thing to germinate to be actually used for malting. It's not made until it's made. And so I think everyone will be really worried about just how the weather looks over the next few days and weeks about getting the rest of the crop in. Could even say that has the malting barley, that distilling malting barley market, got a little bit complacent with saying, yeah, big crop, good growing season, it's in the bag. Actually, let's just wait and see what happens. But it's under a lot of distress because of this strong supply of spring barley, I suppose. So with a strong supply of potentially spring barley, the reality is there's not going to be enough malting demand to utilise all that. It might be that the supply chain decides to look at that and actually thinks the quality, if it can find the quality, put that into store as a bit of a hedge for quality into sort of the new season, which sounds a long way away. But particularly for spring malting barley, weather has a huge impact, and so it might not be a bad hedge of the quality. But I think the reality is that there's simply not enough near-term, or unlikely to be enough near-term demand to be able to absorb all of that crop. And so that crop will have to, in some cases, fall down into the feed barley market. And Helen, though we often look at the value of feed barley relative to feed wheat. And so how's that looking at the moment?
Yeah, that is one of the key things for how much barley then finds its way into animal feed rations, both from a combine point of view and an on-farm perspective as well. And yeah, we're sort of looking around 25, maybe it was up to £30 per tonne a week or two ago. Some of that seems to have softened slightly this last week or two. I think some of that harvest pressure just easing a little bit, possibly, or more wheat pressures coming in. But yeah, it's quite a healthy discount at the moment, quite a strong discount.
A way of thinking about that is one crop's discount is another crop's premium. And I suppose I'd argue, is it as much as barley discount is wheat having a premium because we've not got a surplus of wheat to put onto the export market. Feed barley market is going to be quite interesting. I think it will be finding additional demand, in my view, both through formal trade with feed compounders looking to include as much as possible, but we know competition from imported maize, for instance, is always going to be a contrast. I think it will be tougher than people think to get feed barley off of farms this year, particularly in a mixed farming setting or in the mixed farming areas of the country, because whilst feed barley prices have been kind of quite under a lot of downward pressure, actually some other livestock prices are actually looking okay. So look at the beef price at the moment. Steer price is approaching £5 a kilo. And if you look at the relativity between the two, so at the moment, the beef price is 32 times higher than the barley price. If we go back to 2019, which is kind of the last normal year, I think it was just over 25 times the barley price. So beef has gone up in value versus cost of barley, and that's going to be incentivizing actually a far greater usage of barley to feed cattle. Yeah, you could argue, it's a fairly small corner of the market, but it's important in terms of understanding how farmers might well behave in terms of bringing crops to market or how they utilize those crops. So the value of livestock has gone up relative to the value of barley. That's an interesting signal to say, actually, I think farmers will be looking to either utilize that either themselves or even in localized trade. So from a buying point of view, I don't think it's as easy as it's suggested on paper to get feed barley off farm and then find export markets, for instance, because I think there will be farmers have other options in terms of how they utilize that barley.
Those who roll barley, Jack, are going to be rubbing their hands together.
The logistics can get quite challenging, and it can be like an annoying bit of chewing gum on the bottom of your shoe sometimes, but the economics says that it works.
Speaking of economics and markets reacting in a rational way, should we talk about straw for a moment? Because that's a market that very much, whilst it's kind of long-winded in its time, it operates in a very rational way. That we had high prices earlier in the year, which have encouraged people to bale, and I think there's definitely been straw that's been baled. There's obviously a concern pre-harvest that there wouldn't be as much straw because of the planting area, and we're starting to see the straw price starting to fall, aren't we? Even though it's still quite high.
The straw market is fascinating. It's working really, really well in my view because it's creating the signals. And so we had a strong straw price, in the lead up to harvest, which was encouraging people to plan, we're going to bale straw, we're going to bring it to market. As always, the thing to remember with straw is it's a bulky product. A lot of the cost of actually buying straw is actually getting it delivered to where you need it, as opposed to the underlying price itself. So a strong straw price actually thinks it makes it more viable for farms deep into pure arable regions to actually justify baling and moving that straw to find demand. So beginning of harvest, we were seeing farms in Essex baling straw, which is quite unusual to see. Normally would be chopped because it can't find a marketplace. But then as we've gone through, the markets realise actually there's more straw coming online than there would be, or more area of straw coming on than more normally. And so that straw price has started to fall down. So a bit of price geography. So coming in, the barley straw price through 22 was about £50 a tonne. Last year shot up to about £100 a tonne. These are ex-farm prices in broad terms. And currently now is about half of that increase has been lost. So it's standing at around that £75 a tonne mark as well. So it's kind of the market's adjusting really well. And it looks like the pressure from a livestock point of view is easing in terms of the fears of how much they would have to pay for bedding. Probably still higher than normal, but less so than the sort of height of the market as we were coming into harvest.
It definitely feels that this is one of those periods and one of those seasons where there's areas that are a win for arable farmers. There's areas that are significant losses for some arable farmers as well. And there's a massive area of variation. And it's been an extremely tough growing season. It's created a significant amount of individual challenges on farm that people have now got to work through. And I think the key thing, as ever, is, as we were saying earlier, from a quality perspective, both milling and malting, is understanding what quality you've got and then where those potential end markets are. I think it's crucial to be working with your end buyers and your merchants in this process to be able to understand, again, as you're saying there, Jack, in straw, the logistics of where grain is going to go. And if you are taking a risk on something that you're not certain of the quality because there's a bit of variable quality to it, that's going to be an issue. You don't want to be transporting that 150 miles from mid-Suffolk up to Manchester or something like that for it just to be rejected. So understanding that logistics of grain is going to be really important this season as the quality is really variable. It's just going to be one of those years where, and it's difficult, I know, whilst the harvest is done, it doesn't necessarily mean that the work is done in that sense. There's probably an equally difficult period now that people have got to go through and figuring out how and where to market their grain at the right time.
Yeah, I think this comes in a backdrop, doesn't it, of these long-term changes in the industry. Clearly, we're seeing this ongoing reduction in direct payments, and that would have, in a year like this, direct payments have played a huge role in bringing cash resilience into the business. That is eking away. Yes, we've got SFI in England, but that was never designed to provide that same level of resilience. It's a different thing altogether. And so that resilience is going to have to come from other sources, whether it's drawing down from the success of previous harvests, or whether that's drawing income from diversified enterprises to help nurse the arable enterprise through what's been a really, really tricky season. But I think the key things we always say is it's appreciate it in the multi-year function of the commodity cycle, and rather than sort of making knee-jerk reactions to what's going on. But a lot of it still comes down to understanding the structure and the cost of the business. There's a shameless plug for our farm bench colleagues and the support they do on the benchmarking side, because it's really important to understand it.
Definitely. Well, thank you, Helen, for joining us to talk about everything on the harvest and where we're at. I think we've covered quite a lot there, haven't we, Jack, actually? Quite a lot of detail in that. Right, Jack, I think we need to have a conversation about mystery words, because I'm not sure if I've bent the rules slightly here in mystery words, but I don't think we have a set rules, so I think it might be all right.
I think they're more passive guidelines.
Oh, okay.
Rather than
I think I might be okay. I might be okay then. So I would be surprised if you got mine.
No, not a clue.
No, same. I mean, I didn't get yours, but I never do. So I'm in a way, I've kind of given up trying because I know I'm a complete failure at it. Mine was volcano, which I did right in the start in the introduction. Now, are you allowed to put the mystery word in before we mention that there's mystery words in? I don't know.
I think we have some precedent. I think in a previous episode, I did use my mystery word ahead of announcing or reminding the audience that we have a mystery word. So I think you're absolutely fine.
Safe,
precedent has been set. It's no problem at all.
Perfectly safe then, perfectly safe. I think actually, are we still on a really low score? Is it still like 2-1 to you or something like that?
Yeah.
Over the 10 that we've done, so we're still not doing very well.
So mine was in, as I always do, take myself off some random rabbit hole of about the logistics of processing barley on farm for animal feed, and it being annoying like a bit of chewing gum on the bottom of your shoe.
Do you know what? I was sitting there and I was like, that's a really good. That's actually really good. He's got that analogy spot on. Perfect. Oh. Seamless.
Absolutely. So I don't think we need any adjudication this week. I think we just appreciate each other's mutual rubbishness at spotting mystery words.